I'd like to introduce our two speakers discussing challenges of abandoned and derelict vessel removal. First, we have Karen Forget, the Executive Director of Lynnhaven River Now, and she'll be followed by Alana Keating of the Boat US Foundation. As usual, we'll hold time for questions at the end after they've both presented. But yes, if you both will come up, and Karen, take it away.
I'm very, very happy to be here and happy to be able to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing around abandoned and derelict vessels. So this picture is of the mouth of the Lynnhaven River where it meets the Chesapeake Bay, and just off to the right is the Atlantic Ocean, not very far at all. You can kind of see the little point of land here that sticks out. That's part of Cape Henry. We're at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And if you can see the really faint line right over here, that's the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel that goes from the southern point of the eastern shore of Virginia into Virginia Beach. So 21 miles of bridge and tunnel across the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And I start there because I think that it's these kinds of images that help us remember why we're doing this work and why it's so important. We do oyster restoration, we build living shorelines, we protect and restore wetlands, we plant trees, we do a lot of community education with residents and schools and faith communities and businesses. We do a lot of marine debris work. But how did we get involved with ADVs? And why are we leading this ADV effort in Hampton Roads? Well, through the networks that we've built in our community, I think I can say that we've become sort of the environmental ER. So whenever anybody has a problem, they need what they consider emergency help, they call us. We get calls whenever somebody's neighbor is cutting down trees in what they think is a resource protection area, or when they find an injured animal or an injured bird, and we have increasingly gotten phone calls about abandoned and derelict vessels. This has been going on for 10 years at least, and it has accelerated over that time. And we've never had good, clear answers for the people who called us. Whether it was a boat that was an unsightly boat that's tied up at a pier that's half sunk, or it's a boat that washed up on their own shoreline, or it's their own boat and they don't know what to do with it, so they think maybe they'll give it to us. Which happens very frequently. And we've never had really good answers for any of these people. So that's how we got involved with coastal zone management, with the ADV work group in Virginia, and now are managing this very generous grant from NOAA. So I don't need to tell this audience the problems with ADVs. The pollutants that are on them, frequently gas and oil and other kinds of hazardous materials, plastics that are part of the cabinetry on the boat, or floating plastics, water jugs, all that kind of thing. They create navigation hazards, which our speaker from the Port of Virginia talked about yesterday, both if they are stuck in a channel, and some of these are not official state or federal channels. Some of these are just local channels that people use to get in and out of their cove or their creek. Or they're floating, they're still mobile, and you don't know where they'll be tomorrow. And they also wash up on wetlands, they wash up on oyster reefs, they can destroy underwater grasses and other important fish habitat. So you all are very familiar with the problems, I know. I don't want to make you think that we're the only ones paying attention to this. So as the problem has grown in Virginia, it really has attracted the attention of a lot of different groups. The Marine Debris Plan, which I have a copy of here and that you see on the screen identified ADVs as one of the major categories of marine debris with which we really needed to have some kind of strategic plan to deal with it. And there are like 7 things in this plan. I think that my friend Zach is going to talk about the plan a little bit more this afternoon, but I'll just mention the 7 things that are in here. Lack of knowledge on the current process for removing ADVs, insufficient knowledge about storm preparedness, need to update a database to keep track of where ADVs are, lack of vessel recycling options, lack of recycling infrastructure for ADVs, lack of funds for ADV removal, need for the creation and funding for a Virginia ADV removal and prevention program, and the need for monitoring for Virginia ADV removal and prevention. Well, those are all very, very good goals and all things that we need to work on in Virginia. There are 7 specific strategies there. We've made progress on 2 or 3 of them. We still have a long, long way to go. The poster that you see on the right side of the screen is now posted at marinas and boat stores and pump out stations and other places throughout the coastal region to help us get the public's input on where these ADVs are located. And we had a one-time $3 million investment in the state budget in 2020 for ADV removal, which went to the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, but is only available in the coastal region of Virginia. So currently on the ADV list, that was one of the strategies in this report and is managed by Coastal Zone Management. They have over 200 ADVs listed with coordinates, and most of these have been identified by citizens in Virginia who have sent the information to them. Some are coming from local government, some from Coast Guard sources, but a lot of it is publicly sourced information, and they're in rural, undeveloped waterways, they're in suburban waterways, they're in urban waterways, they're at marinas, they're all over. And each one of those different kinds of situations presents a different kind of challenge for the towers and for removal. So this map kind of shows you our service area for this grant. The first part of the grant, we have $3 million over 3 years from the NOAA Marine Debris Program that Will mentioned earlier, thank you. And our service area is kind of defined on this map. Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Suffolk, the peninsula, the middle peninsula, the northern neck, and the eastern shore of Virginia. So it's a pretty large service area, and our goal is to remove 100 ADVs from this service area. And in order to do that, we need a whole lot of partners. So our home base is Virginia Beach. That's where we do the majority of our work. About 30% of Virginia Beach is in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. About 5% of the land area drains directly to the Atlantic Ocean, and 2/3 drains into the Albemarle-Pamlico, the second largest estuary in the country, which people kind of are not so aware of in Virginia, that we are sandwiched between the 2 biggest estuaries in the country. So we have both government partners and NGO partners, and they are located all around this service area so that they can help us both with identifying ADVs, with community outreach, and all the other parts of this grant. The removal process is not simple. In Virginia, you have to either have the title to the boat, you have to have a letter from the owner if they can't find the title that says you have authority to remove it, or you have to advertise it in the newspaper twice over 60 days and allow an owner to respond and claim that boat. So and as our speaker from the port said yesterday, if you put a line on it, you own it. And that's a big kind of cloud over the towers sometimes, that they don't want to take ownership of these boats. So the whole kind of authority to remove it can be very complicated in Virginia. And then there are the jurisdictional things too. Is it in state waters? Is it on private property? Is it in a federal channel? Is it in a state channel? All of the different jurisdictions come into play too and can complicate the issue. So our first step is to verify the ADVs that we've put on the list, do site visits and assessments on those, and then we have to go through this pretty laborious process of establishing ownership and getting permission to remove these 100 ADVs. Then we're counting on Boat US to do the actual removals, and they will be handling that whole process for us. And then post-removal, we will be doing assessments of the site, documenting all of this, and then dealing with the disposal of the boats, which is another huge question, where, as identified in the marine debris plan, we don't have good infrastructure for disposal. Currently, cutting it up into 4-foot sections and taking it to the landfill is one of the disposal methods. Not really a good process. So there's a lot of work to be done on that end of the process also. And then the second part of our grant, and I think part of what set this apart, is that we are really going to be doing a lot of outreach into the community. Again, using our partners and others to talk to boat owners, talk to marina owners, talk to the localities, talk to the Coast Guard, talk to all the players that have a part in this problem, and try to both figure out what's going on and why we think we know why we have a problem with ADVs, but really get to the bottom of it and figure out why we have this problem, get a lot of different people's input. I know there's one place on the North Landing River in the southern part of Virginia Beach where for generations people have just taken their boats out there and intentionally sunk them. There's a whole cove that's just full of boats that mostly pleasure boats, some fishing, crabbing boats that people just intentionally sink there because that's what they do when the boat isn't useful any longer. So there's both tradition as well as just the kind of quagmire of regulations, the cost. There are a lot of factors, and we really want to get to the bottom of that and figure out what the needs of boat owners are so that we can hopefully help the state of Virginia and our other partners to craft a program that will help us have a statewide program to prevent the situation we're in now with ADVs all over all of our waterways, and really no strategic way to get rid of them. So this is all of the stuff we're doing to gather that information. We're doing surveys, we're doing focus groups, we're doing individual interviews, we're doing a lot of outreach work. I'm going to skip over this one and come back to it. And we have two big partners in that outreach work. Gary Harris with the Center for Sustainable Communities, and Steve Robbie, whom you're going to hear from this afternoon from OpinionWorks, are both working with us on that second half of the grant. So our overall objectives are to remove 100 ADVs in our pretty large coastal service area, gather information that will illuminate the problem and the challenges that currently exist, develop strategies for meeting the current challenges, make recommendations for effective communication of those strategies, and make all this information as widely available as we can. So we're going to, send it, we're going to be presenting it to DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, to the Department of Wildlife Resources, Resources, to the Virginia Marine Resources Commission and others, and all of the ADV work group members, and hopefully it will give us the data and the experience, recorded experience from our removals to really move forward with a statewide program. Now, there are two areas that we're not dealing with that I also wanted to mention that are upcoming problems. We're not dealing with all of the boats that are sitting on trailers in people's backyards or in farm fields, or that we think there are thousands of, maybe hundreds of thousands across Virginia. We're not dealing with that in this grant. We're dealing with boats that are in our waterways. And this is a coastal program, so we're also not dealing with the inland lakes and waterways, which also have a problem with ADVs. So we know there's more work to do after this grant is finished too. That's what I wanted to relay about our grant. I'm happy to answer questions. This is the Pungo Ferry landing bridge across the North Landing River in the southern part of Virginia Beach, which is the headwaters to the Alamo-Pamlico estuary.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I want to start off by saying that this is my first in-person conference in over a year, so please know that I'm going to be super excited, and I'm going to try and stay on topic and on time, but I'm very excited to be here. So I just wanted to start by introducing who I am and who Boat US is. We are a small group. Boat US Foundation is a nonprofit division of Boat US, the Boat Owners Association of the United States. They do membership, on-water towing, insurance, and we as the nonprofit do the education, the outreach, boating safety, clean water initiatives. We have 11 employees with over 270 collective years of boating experiences. We are boaters, we love boating, we love the water. And we're located in Annapolis, but right now a whole bunch of us are remote most of the time, but we like to get together there sometimes. So our mission is to promote safe and clean boating across the country and really enable behavior change to reduce accidents and fatalities and improve our waterways. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are funded primarily by grants and individual donations. We reach over 1 million boaters each year with safe and clean boating messages through over a dozen initiatives that we have. We have Life Jacket Loaner. We have the only free online boating safety course approved for education requirements in 36 states. We have hands-on boat training, and then of course our environmental initiatives. We have fishing line recycling, we work on invasive species, and what we're here to talk about today, large-scale marine debris. So I wanted to talk about, go back from, only forward? Oh, back, there we go. Wrong button. So yesterday, Laura talked about stories. I wanted to give a little bit of a story about why we are here today. We were talking about how do you get involved in ADVs. So about 10 years ago, I'll start back a little bit more. About 20 years ago, I started working with our on-water towing fleet. They do on-water tows, but they also have salvage companies, and I would work with them to increase their efforts in boating safety and clean water initiatives in their local community. Whether it was Life Jacket Loaner, whether they did fishing line recycling, we would give them all the tools that they needed to improve their community and be involved. And they came to me about 10 years ago and said, these things are great. Our waterway cleanups, those are great. But we have this big materials that are everywhere that we need to get rid of. And we have the skills to remove these boats, these crab pots, these nets. But how do we do it? Who do we talk to about it? How do we get approval to do this? And some of the towers were already involved with NOAA for cleanup efforts for large-scale marine debris. Like the A8 Anchorage cleanup in San Diego was one of our on-water towers. So we went to NOAA, we looked at the funding opportunities, we partnered with several of our towers for individual projects, some in the Great Lakes, some in North Carolina, some right here in Ocean City, and we applied for funding. We were successful with several projects, and our very first large-scale marine debris removal was here in Ocean City 7 years ago. We removed a couple derelict nets off of an artificial reef off the coast of Ocean City. And if you are a Maryland person like me, did not know that there was reefs off the coast of Ocean City before this project. And we worked with Towboat US Ocean City and the Ocean City Reef Foundation, also didn't know that one, to remove these nets and promote this effort in the community. It was a great project for us. We had so much community involvement from the city to individual commercial anglers. Everybody was involved in this. But one of the things that we saw with this project and the continued projects that we did with NOAA was the challenge of the timeline from when you apply to when you can remove something. So our experience was one of the nets disappeared, but there was a new net that came, so it was great. We had a solution. Another project, we lost a boat. The boat had been in a certain spot for 10 years, and the next winter, when the ice thawed, the boat was gone. So the timeline was so difficult. And then the application, these are federal grants. They require a lot. There's a 40-page NOFO. There's a 35-page application. And groups like these towers that we work with or small nonprofits cannot do this. They can't have a grant writer on staff. They can't spend the time that it takes to do this. So we kept talking to NOAA, and we were like, just give us money, and we'll help these groups do it. I know, give us money, just give us money. We'll do this. We will help these groups. We will help find these projects. We will speed this up. We have a history of giving out grants, small grants for education for 35 years. We'll do this. So, I hoped, I prayed, and it happened. Voting infrastructure law came through, and there was money. And NOAA said, we want to sub-award grants, so we applied. So that is how we ended up here today, and I'm so excited because it's a full circle moment for us that our first removal was here, and this is the first time we get to publicly talk about our $10 million NOAA grant to do a sub-award grant across the country and make it easier for people to get this funding and to do this removal that we are all so passionate about. So I want to take a couple minutes, because I know I don't have that long, to talk about the parts of the grant. Obviously, there's a sub-award grant. We're also working on a national ADV database, because as Karen said, we need to know about these. We find them, people are telling us, but then we got to do something about them. And then my favorite, my little baby, is the Marine Related Waste Disposal Conference, because it's great for us to pull this stuff up. It's great for all of us to be removing debris, but what do we do with it after it comes out? And how are we going to have sustainable solutions? So I'll touch on each of these. I do want to start by saying that we are still in the early processes of this grant. We still have a lot of work to do, and I don't have all the answers. So you might have questions, and my answer is going to be, I don't know yet. But it also means we're open to ideas, and one of the great things about the foundation, and the reason we can reach 1 million voters with 11 staff, is our partnerships. We maintain relationships with over 700 organizations across the country. Whether it's a state, a federal agency, or a local marina, we are there. We are part of these conversations. We're connected with Virginia's Marine Debris Plan, with the Mid-Atlantic, with every region that we can, so we can be part of these solutions. So first, the grant program. It is open to everybody. You're a nonprofit, you're a business, you're a state, you're a region. We're here to work with you. We're really encouraging partnerships. You are the expert in what you do, but you might not be the expert in everything, so build it together. Lynnhaven River Now is the example of what I see as the perfect grant product. It brings in all the people that can do all the parts, and that's what we want to see on a local level, on a regional level, however it works best for your organization and your partners. These are removal projects, and there is an education and outreach component, and we will be here to support every one of our grantees in education and outreach. If you haven't seen it, we have been putting out press releases left and right because people need to know about this, and we will help those organizations do the same thing moving through the grant process. We are hoping that we will have letters of intent open by the end of January of 2024, and that we will start awarding money and approving applications by the fall. We are looking for a tight timeline. We will have a letter of intent, we will have an application, we have a review panel to review all of our applications, and these will not be 35-page narratives. These are direct questions, direct budget items. We want to make this as easy as possible for whoever wants to apply. You do not need to be in SAM, you do not need to have 12 logins, you do not need to have an SF424. You just need to apply on our system with one login, and we are there to help. So we are very excited about that. The next part is the database. We know that there's databases out there. We're going to start focus groups to get an understanding of what the need is for data, what data is there, who's collecting it, how we can get it out of their system and into a single system so that they don't have to change their processes or repeat anything. This will be both the private sector, the agencies, the states reporting ADVs, but also the public, like Karen's poster and saying, report your ADV to this site. And this is also going to document not just the problem, understanding where the ADVs are, whether they're inland, they're coastal, they're lakes, they're wherever, what's going on with them, but also the work being done and the accomplishments that we are getting as a community removing these ADVs. And then final, the Marine Related Disposal Waste Conference. This is about highlighting the current efforts, and I'm not talking about just ADVs. I'm not talking about fiberglass. I'm talking about the waste that we all know is happening, the trash interceptors and the contaminated plastics from there, shrink wrap, flares, derelict nets and fishing gear and fishing line, and after yesterday's presentation, coastal storm damage or debris is going to be added to the topic, and we want to pull together the people who are doing the work. We've been having these conversations. I've been having these conversations for a decade. We helped pilot RIMTA's fiberglass recycling program. We brought in other states to hear what they're doing to see if they can replicate it. But instead of a 1-to-1 basis, now we want to do a 1-to-300 basis. We want to get it out there as much as possible. This is also about future efforts. Somebody asked a question yesterday about technology in dealing with coastal storm damage and what technology is needed. What technology is needed for disposal? What's out there already that we can be utilizing to deal with this problem? And how can we network for those solutions? So we are planning this for February of 2025. We are going to be putting this out as soon as we can of information so everybody can put it on their calendars and put it in their budgets. We are looking for proposals. We are looking for vendors. We are looking for sponsors. We are looking for a planning committee for this as we work through these. I've already got Donna Morrow signed up. She said she was helping with it. So anybody else that is interested, we're here to, this is a conference for the people in this room and beyond. We want to make it what you need it to be to get solutions for your programs, for your state, for your region. So last is, how do you get involved? We need your help. So the first one is, we have an open position at the foundation for this project. You'll work on other things, but it is for this project. If you know somebody who would be a perfect fit for this, that is passionate, there we go, that is engaged, that is excited about this, please go to our website. The link is there. They can apply. It does go to Geico's site. That's because they're our parent company, but it really is my job. And then we have our grant reviewer panel. Applications will be coming out in the next month or so. Those are the people who will be reviewing these applications and helping us make the best decision about who to fund. If your expertise is in education and outreach, salvage, removal, permitting, and you aren't going to apply for funding, or you know somebody who's part of this, please have them apply to us. Database focus groups, also January. January is going to be real busy. We're going to start putting out those press releases. We already have people. Kathleen's over there. I got on a list saying we're going to be reaching out to you. We'll be putting out press releases. We'll be putting it on this website. This website's kind of the be-all and end-all of everything I'm doing right now, and it'll all be there. And then the conference participation, any of those ways to participate, if you want to talk to us about possibilities. And then finally, apply. If you don't apply, send it to people you think could apply. Please apply when the letter of intent comes out. So I'm here all day. My colleague Lynn over here is here all day. Here's our contact information. Clean Water is the email address for the whole NOAA grant team. We'd love to talk to you about it, and we're so excited. And thank you guys for having me here today.
Thank you. I'm not a boat owner, so I don't know what does responsible boat disposal look like. If you have enough money to own a boat and you want to get rid of it responsibly, is that cost barrier what's driving a lot of people to abandon their boats?
I think that is a very complex question with a very complex answer, like everything else that involves the environment. It really depends, and I love part of Karen's project is getting to some of those barriers in Virginia, and we know some of the, because of the work we've been doing and the research in the ADV working group, we know some of those barriers in Virginia. Titling is an issue, disposal options is an issue, cost is an issue, transportation is an issue. It really depends on the areas. Sometimes it's cultural too. Sometimes it's that dumping ground.
Right.
Sometimes it's so much of the derelict vessel problem in a lot of areas, especially southern states, it's a housing issue. These are places where people are living, and they don't plan on operating this boat, they just want to live in it. Florida has this problem where they even remove the boats and then they auction them off and they end up back being a housing situation. California deals with it. So it's not, I hate saying it, but there's never one answer for one state, one region, one area about what the barriers are, and we got to work to address all of them.
Yeah, but there is a pathway. If you did want to get rid of your boat, then somebody would deal with it, like and recycle it or...
No.
I can address that a little bit.
Okay.
It depends a lot on what kind of boat you're talking about.
Yeah.
Is this a 20-foot fiberglass boat, or is it a 40-foot wooden boat, or is it, what kind of motor or engine does it have? The variables are huge in terms of what kind of boat you're looking at. And the cost currently is like between $10,000 and $20,000.
Wow.
Depending upon what kind of boat you have. That is cost prohibitive for a lot of people. And like a lot of other environmental issues, environmental pollution problems, these boats end up often in lower income communities where they're a hazard and they're polluting the waterways. It's like other, environmental problems. The least resourced communities often end up with the biggest problems to deal with. So it's really complicated, and there are no clear lanes, which is why we have such a big problem with it. And it's costly.
Yes.
So there's
Thank you.
there's a lot of infrastructure that's needed, and that's part of what we're going to try to get into or get started looking at in the half of our grant, the second part of it, is really what kind of infrastructure do we need? What kind of resources do boat owners need? What kind of resources do marina owners need? I'm hearing from more and more marina operators who have 10, 12 boats sitting at their marina that they haven't collected a slip fee for in a decade, and they don't know what to do with them. The owners are gone. So it's a complicated problem without a clear avenue, and I don't look at the boat owners as the problem. I think the lack of infrastructure, the lack of any sort of support structure is the problem.
And I'll add to it, our hope is with the disposal conference is to start building that infrastructure, to start identifying it, and with all of the grants that we give out, where are the barriers, where are the challenges, why can't people dispose of things? Virginia was eye-opening to me, how hard it was to just remove a vessel, and then there's no options for disposal, and no sustainable options for disposal, but even just options is challenging.
Well, thank you.
We actually have ADV problems on the Anacostia River inside Washington, D.C., too. So it is more widespread in more types of context, I think, than a lot of people realize. So I'm glad to see all the attention on it. I have two questions. One is just an idea that came up yesterday and today. Has there been any intersection between marine debris conversations and other fiberglass recycling needs, like the wind energy? And then I'll just tack on my second question, which is if y'all could talk a little bit about mapping systems to report ADVs, because we've been recently submitted as part of somebody else's proposal for doing similar work, but on the Anacostia River, and if we get invited to propose and then get lucky, then we'd like to benefit from y'all's experience that you already got.
So I'll talk on like RIMTA was talking with the wind energy sector about the turbines and things like that. And for us with this conference, it's not just, boaters aren't the only ones that use shrink wrap. You know, the agriculture industry uses it. Boaters aren't the only one that have fiberglass. The energy industry uses it. So how do we bring it together? And Katie and I were just talking, I think, oh, there she is, about the Department of Energy and work that they're doing and how we can do it. Because there's multiple streams of the same material, and how do we have those conversations? And as far as the mapping, we are in the very early stages. We have a couple things that we're doing. We are not looking at as extreme mapping as some agencies use, because we want it to be user-friendly for the public. So, but we're looking at what do the agencies have. So I definitely would love to chat with you later and include you in the focus groups and the conversations, because if people want to do their own mapping in their own database, we love that. We just want to take that information and port it right into our system without anybody having to touch it, so that we can be making sure that we have some kind of collective thing. Because like you said, in Anacostia, it's not just a coastal problem, and it's not just a boat problem. We hear from our on-water towers that it's a plane problem, it's a house problem. I had one tower that dismantled 35 houseboats in a single summer on his lake. And these are like 30 feet plus that are just abandoned on his not that big of a lake that you would think there would be that many. So it's a widespread problem.
And I would just add to that I think disposal is a big looming question. We've had some preliminary conversations with a concrete block manufacturing company who is going to test burning shredded fiberglass in their kiln to see if it burns hot enough for their manufacturing process. But that's only step one. So what are the other, is that a viable, sustainable kind of thing? Are there air emissions from that are worse than the landfill options? So there's so much to explore here, and I think, through our efforts in this grant, we're going to scratch the surface of that disposal question. But I would love to see a whole industry like we have around car parts for recycling, reusing, repurposing, refurbishing boats too. So that's a long-term, obviously, kind of plan, but we need to start on that process.
So this question is for Karen more than anything else. You had mentioned the $3 million one-time budget. Are you supplemented at all by your state's budget?
We are not. No, this grant funding is coming to us separate from our other efforts. We have lots of other funding sources for the other kinds of work that we do, but this is the sole source for this ADV program. The state does have $3 million that was awarded to VMRC in 2020 to do ADV removals. They have a lot of restrictions that we don't have. They can only work with municipalities. They can't work with private property owners. They just have a lot of restrictions that we don't have. So I think our efforts are going to be complementary.
Hi, thank you both. A little bit piggybacking off of what we've been talking about, but just curious if anyone is an advocacy person in the room or policy person and knows if there's any sort of proposals or push for extended producer responsibility from these boat manufacturers. I don't know if that's part of the conversation yet. I know it's on the agenda for later, but I'm just curious in the ADV realm if anyone's actually just pushing the manufacturers themselves.
Not currently, to my knowledge. Extended producer responsibility is something that comes up every year in our legislative session. I think some of our speakers this afternoon might touch on that. It hasn't gone anywhere in the Virginia legislature currently. There is a program that we're partnering with VIMS, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, along with others, to try to get some kind of recycling program around the shrink wrap that's on every new boat when it's delivered. If you ever see these on trailers going to be delivered, they're all wrapped in plastic. And some of the boat storage facilities do that. The ones that stack them in the winter, they wrap them in plastic too. So there's, that's a huge source of material that needs some kind of recycling program where none exists right now.
So far, I have not heard from any of our advocacy and government affairs partners that there's been anything on that side. It's hard because it's such the boats that we're dealing with now are probably not manufacturers that are around either,
So Karen, just to give you a heads up, there is a shrink recycling program that is currently in the Maryland, Virginia Eastern Shore area. They take all of that shrink wrap, they send it to Trex. Trex melts it down and makes composite deck boards. And they also, there is a manufacturer that is starting to use the fiberglass boats for similar product. It's a Maryland company. Their name is Wolf Brand, and they are working on that.
I'd love for you to send me the info about the fiberglass recycling.
Yeah.
And I think that the Clean Marina program is sort of the apparatus for the boat shrink, the plastic shrink wrap recycling. So I'm glad to hear it's already up and running on the Eastern Shore.
There's a few shrink wrap recycling options out there. Dr. Shrink's been doing it for a long time. Ohio Sea Grant has a program in Ohio. Maryland DNR, Donna left, but they have their program, and it's a great start, but there's a lot to be improved upon.
So during this session, we're going to be hearing from Ward Slacum Jr. of the Oyster Recovery Partnership, Brittany Haywood of Delaware Sea Grant, Steve Everett of Stockton University, and Renee Sanders of the Virginia Institute for Marine Science. So Ward, if you can come up here.
I'd like to first thank the organizers of this Marine Debris Summit for the invitation here to present the 2 decades of derelict trap research and large-scale removals within the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay. Let me figure this out here. There we go. I think I want to answer the biggest question that is probably on your mind, is that why is somebody from the Oyster Recovery Partnership here to talk about derelict crab traps? And the answer to that is simply there's the fishermen within the Maryland, they sort of do 2 things. They're either they're blue crab fishing in the time when the blue crab fishery is open, and then in the wintertime they're oystering. So Oyster Recovery Partnership has had a long-standing relationship with watermen within Maryland, and that's really the connection here. Let me first go back and say, over 2 decades, we certainly have had a lot of partners that have participated either in the research part of this and also in the project-related part of this, and their logos are up on the screen there. Most of them, are still active and interested in the work that we're doing, and we still continue to do this work. I don't think that there is any group that might have an interest in removing a piece of debris off of the seabed that isn't taking advantage of side-scan sonar. And back in the early 2000s, side-scan sonar was a new instrument into the research in the Chesapeake Bay. At that point, we found that it was very accurate at identifying crab traps, and in the bay, we found that there were areas that we suspected had high densities derelict crab traps. And so, at that point in time, we were unclear. We didn't have information about their impact to the fishery within the bay. And so we embarked on a large-scale research program to quantify the distribution and the impacts of these derelict traps. And why would we do that? Well, the blue crab fishery is very important to the nation, for one, but it also, in terms of Maryland, it had a dockside value of about $50 million, so very important fishery. We didn't know what the impacts were. We also felt that it had characteristics that would make it highly susceptible to lost fishing gear. Primarily, it's a single buoyed trap fishery by mostly. And at any one time of the year in the peak season, there could be upwards of 200,000 traps that were actively fishing in the bay. It also occurs in shallow areas where there is a combination of other uses like recreational boating and or shipping vessels that occur. So we embarked on this large-scale program. We used side-scan sonar to do a broad survey of the Maryland portion of the bay. What's up on the screen there, you can see an example of the side scan that we used, but also a transect that shows identified derelict traps in that transect. We did that throughout the bay. We identified there were high-density traps and quite a lot of derelict traps within Maryland's portion of the bay. We also did experiments where we replicated traps in the water, and we monitored them over time. Combination of those two activities told us that there was potential that derelict traps could have an impact on the fishery. We used the spatial information that we collected, and there's a map up on the screen. You can see that in blue, what that map depicts is the area where the commercial industry is active. But in red, we created a model that would allow us, it was a geographic weighted regression model that allowed us to predict the areas where we suspected there might be high density traps. And that's what's in the red there. We completed that work. We developed a report. And in the report, we gave a suite of recommendations, some of them being to mitigate derelict traps in the bay. And one of those recommendations was to conduct very large-scale removal operations. At that same time, there was a large amount of federal funds that was made available to the state of Maryland to support the blue crab industry. We were able to use those funds, use the information that we gathered to develop a large-scale program that was designed to help watermen, pay them to go out and remove derelict traps. We used the model we developed to identify where that work would occur. What's up on the screen is the distribution of the locations within the Maryland portion of the bay where those operations, those removal operations occurred. And we also felt at the time that we wanted to continue learning and get information. So we felt like data collection was very important. So we trained the watermen who were participating in the program to collect the data on every single piece of debris that was removed. Also up on the screen is just an example of the data sheet that we provided them. So over the course of 2 years, so 2010 and 2012 was when this work occurred, we operated in 14 sites in the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, and we hired roughly 800 watermen to participate in that work over the 2-year period and work in those areas. They basically worked for about a week in each one of those locations, and what we asked them to do was bring their ingenuity and their expertise to the table to help remove these traps. We also paid them a stipend, a daily stipend, and their mate to do this work. And they typically would bring grapples or some combination of grapples to come out and help us identify or remove those traps. We also use side scan, so we would go to those locations, do a broad scale side scan survey, identify within that imagery the traps that we suspected were on the bottom, and we used that to guide those operations. In that process, over the 2 years, we recovered about 24,000 pieces of debris, all mostly related to derelict crab traps, and most of that was also intact derelict crab traps. But there were pieces of debris, pieces of traps that came up that were either destroyed in the recovery process and or were already degraded enough that they were just in pieces on the bottom. We also recovered other debris such as nets, wire, and other things that related to the marine industry. But what we did find was that model was very accurate at predicting the locations where the traps occurred and also the densities of the traps. Here's an example of some of the imagery that we used during that project. This just shows thousands of traps on the bottom that we identified in side scan sonar near the Road and West River. That's an area just below Annapolis, Maryland, on the western shore that has a tremendous amount of crabbing effort that occurs in the shallow area. It's also an area where a tremendous amount of sailing activity and boating activity occurs. Here's another example in Tangier Sound, where there, again, are thousands of traps that we identified in the side scan, and that's an area that's on the lower eastern shore of Maryland, area where there's a lot of shipping that occurs within that location. So fast forward to today, what are we doing with this information? Well, basically the lesson that we learned from this was that we felt as though that this could be advocated as a best management practice for sustainable fisheries within the industry and to managers. So we have been working recently with funders, the State Highway Administration, and also Baltimore County. We are not doing the big broad-scale bay-wide approach at this point. We're taking those areas that we call hotspots. We're doing a much more targeted approach, and we're looking for funders to help us go out in those areas and sort of replicate the same process, but not doing it on that big broad scale. We also feel as though, just given the information that we learned, that doing this in time frames, so doing this between 5 and 10 year intervals, might allow those traps to accumulate in such a way into the densities that would sort of justify the level of funding needed to go back out and remove them. As I said, we're sort of replicating the same process. Here's some pictures of watermen out there with their grapples removing or capturing these traps. We rely upon their collaboration to do this. We pay them a stipend, training. We're really controlled about how we do this because we have the side scan sonar imagery to help us guide our daily work. And so we develop work zones in these areas, and then that allows us to ensure that we're recovering the most that we can within an area. We also provide oversight, ensuring that data is being collected accurately, that the workforce, the fleet, if you will, is actually actively out there doing what we're asking them to do. Here's an example of some of the recent sonar. We have sort of graduated down from using this very high sophisticated, high technology cost sonar to now off-the-shelf sonar that is less costly but just as accurate and just as impactful as we have. So this is some example of areas in the Upper Bay where all those points are what we suspect as derelict crab traps. So most recently we did a 6-day project earlier this year in March, where we were out with a fleet of watermen. I believe it was about 12 different vessels out there actively helping us do this work, and we recovered about 70% of those points that were on that previous image. And we like to collect that information, quantify what's out there, because we can give the funder some guidance on what they can expect as a return on their investment. We set a metric of, we suspect we will recover X% of what's down there. So there's some guidance there, there's some contractual obligations that we can provide. 95% of the gear and debris that's recovered is typically derelict crab trap associated, and most of that is still going to be intact gear. We advocate for recycling as best we can, and some of it gets recycled. We ask individuals to come get the metal, take it, and recycle it on their own. Some of it does end up in the landfill, unfortunately, but those pieces that are usable and can be repurposed, we advocate that the participants can reuse them, and they do when that happens. As I said, we still collect data. So here's a graph of the composition of what's in the traps when we're out there working. This graph shows the abundance in terms of numbers on the left axis, and on the bottom is the species. And in the Upper Bay, in the wintertime, you can typically find a lot of more freshwater-oriented species in the composition of the catch. And in this case, sunfish, catfish, white perch, yellow perch, those were all found in the traps. But of course, blue crab and dead blue crab were still found in those traps. In the wintertime, it's not a time when there's a lot of activity from marine species, so we really feel like this is certainly an underestimate of the impact of these traps, because we're capturing it at that point in time. And so to wrap it up, Over the course of this 13-year period of these large-scale traps and targeted trap removal projects, we have recovered nearly 30,000 pieces of derelict trap debris. Again, most of those are intact crab traps that could continue to trap animals and kill them. We feel like there is a benefit continuing to connect to industry, to the watermen, and in the way that we conduct these, we're doing this work in the wintertime, which is the off-season for the blue crab fishery, so it provides them some economic benefit at the time of the job. They're also, they're insightful. They don't want to lose traps, so when they can, they're out there actually trying to recover the traps when the situation allows them to do that. So they also have some local knowledge of maybe where their traps are, so it's beneficial to both parties to get them on board and to help them, or to allow them to help us recover the traps. Work from VIMS back in 2016 indicated that these traps, the derelict traps, can be out there actively fishing and competing with the gear of the active fishery when it is active. So we feel as though removing those traps that can still continue to trap is actually going to reduce that competition when the fishery is active, and that would ideally help improve yield in those local locations where we're working. And then finally, we feel as though the value is to continue to educate industry on the scale and the impacts of derelict traps in Chesapeake Bay.
Thank you so much. And next we have Brittany Haywood.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Brittany Haywood. I work for Delaware Sea Grant, which is housed within the University of Delaware. And I'm going to be talking to you guys about derelict crab pots from a recreational fishery only in Delaware's inland bays. And if you want to know more about Sea Grant, you learned a little bit about Diana, or from Diana yesterday, but come find me. We're a cool entity. We also have the National Sea Grant Program has funding for marine debris projects. So before I dive into the crab pot problem, it's good to kind of understand a little bit about the area. And the first is, where are the inland bays? Well, they're directly to the north of us. So you can see Ocean City on the bottom, and then we're the blue watershed boundary there. And this area is relatively shallow. It's pretty protected from high winds. It has a muddy bottom, and it has, again, a recreational only blue crab fishery, which there is a ghost pot, a derelict crab pot problem in this area. So combining the accessibility and just the way the layout of the area is, it kind of lends itself to using volunteers for removal. So that's what I'm going to focus on a little bit here. But a little bit more about the area. So this area, the annual population is about 100,000, and every summer it doubles. The blue crab fishery across Delaware is estimated around $7 million, with about 1 million of those crabs coming from the recreational portion of that. And then from the recreational standpoint, Delaware law allows for 2 crab pots per 1 person, and they must be checked every 72 hours with a bycatch reduction device. So keep that in mind when I talk about the issue here. And unlike the other speakers that'll be here today on this panel, we're relatively recent to the derelict crab pot game in understanding what's going on. So that's where we've been focusing a lot of our energy on right now. So we've done abandonment studies. So in 2019, my predecessor went out with the Department of Natural Resources Enforcement and did a project where she looked at what is the actual abandonment happening of these pots. And it's about 12 to 14% of them are being abandoned. And with that, the bycatch reduction devices or turtle excluders, only about a quarter of them were missing those devices, which are required by law. However, we did a roundup event last week, and I will say only about a quarter of those pots actually had them. So I think it might just depend on when and where you're looking at them. In addition, we've done surveys of the different areas from 2020 to 2022, and you can see them on this map here. The white and blue dots are those areas that were surveyed, and we've done removal events. And then again, we're really looking at focusing on how to get volunteers involved, making sure residents are aware of the problem, and getting them to prevent and remove. So what is the problem? So thus far, we've mapped about 1,500 acres, and we're finding on average about 1.6 pots per acre. So the Delaware Inland Bays consists of about 20,000 acres, so that's about 20,000 pots within that blue watershed that we're finding. And then, so this image you're looking at here is side scan sonar swaths that have been put together with the red boxes showing the pots, and this is just one of those areas. And then the bottom image is what those crab pots look on side scan sonar. And this is consumer grades. Anyone can purchase this and use it. And then since 2020, we have done a couple of removal events each year, and actually this number is up to 340. It should be the updated number as of last week for removal events. So we're kind of limited on our capacity because we're relying on those volunteers. Some of the causes of losses, a lot of us know this, but I just wanted to point out, again, this area is heavily tourism, heavily seasonal. What you see here in the top, your top left, is a typical summer day. So there are a lot of boaters out in this small area that are impacting the waters. So we're having losses from storms, currents, vandalism, boat strikes, all sorts of things, poor rigging, as you can see in this image here. And then the impacts, of course, are the ghost fishing, habitat degradation. But my question, kind of in working all of this, is what is the cost? So, of course, there are navigational hazards, but also to dredging. So how much are these ghost pots costing residents because of the dredging that has to occur so boaters can get around? What's the impact there? And then the other flip side is, are they actually providing habitat? So in an area that doesn't have a lot of structure, are they providing more habitat in off seasons? And I know there is some research going into that. But what are we doing here at Sea Grant? So we're having kind of a three-prong approach where we're taking on recruiting, training, and incentivizing volunteers to understand how to use consumer-grade side-scan sonar. And then we're going to continue to move that and transition into removal events, to recycle and rehab and refurb the derelict pots, and then also heavily education on not only the crabber front on how to properly rig, place the pot, but on the recreational boater front on how to understand, like, here's a buoy, the tide's going this way, this is the line, and which way it goes. Because so many of these people just rent a boat for the day. Kind of odd to me, but. So, typically how our crab pot roundup removal events have been, let me see if, it's kind of a three-prong approach. So we've used University of Delaware vessels, which have been equipped with side scan sonar. They go out and find the pots, and then they tag them with a buoy. And then we have a team of volunteer boaters, as you can see here in this video, who go out and haul those pots in. We have a couple of them who've really gotten into it and have built, as you can see here, custom davits for their boats to get them out easier. And they use this to try and get a lot of the sediment out and then throw them on the boat. And then we have a team which moves the crab pots to the shore, and a group of folks who process it on the shore for data and all that other jazz. So really the limiting factor we're finding right now is the side scan sonar. For an example, the event we just had last week, we had one boat running side scan sonar. They were able to tag 50 pots over 2 days. So to kind of address that, we recently received funding from the National Sea Grant Office to develop training for volunteers to get them to understand how to use side scan sonar, how to set it up on their boat. So we're going to do a combination of in-person workshops and virtual web-based trainings that address the topics here to get people more comfortable with the topic. And you say that's great, but this side scan sonar costs money, so how are they going to get it? So we're also going to have a sonar library, and this library will be accessible to anyone to check out a unit. There'll be modular units that can adapt to different boat styles, be attached to the boat, and then used during different removal events. So we're really trying to figure out how to reach these people. There are a lot of folks that are super interested in helping. The limiting factor is really the boats on that front. And then that's kind of from there. So if you like Dr. Seuss, I have been reading lots of Dr. Seuss books lately. The in summary side is basically a summary of our project in Dr. Seuss style. But the team consists of myself. I handle a lot of the logistics, coordination on that front, and Dr. Art Trombanis with UD. His lab is responsible for the sonar side, so we partner on a lot of these projects to get them done.
All righty, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Marco for inviting me today and for hosting this event. It's great to have everybody in the same room and connect with people working on these issues. Coming from Stockton University, we have an predominantly undergraduate program in marine science with a focus on oceanography and hydrography. Myself and my team run the Marine Field Station, the off-campus facility, and support the marine operations. And I, in particular, work a lot with the hydrography program and side-scan sonar, and that's been my primary involvement with the DFG removals. So a little bit of a history. Our hydrography program noticed gear loss during just student training, 2009, 2010. At about that same time, I read about the work being done in Chesapeake Bay by VIMS and others. We realized that some of the smaller estuaries, like Delaware's inland bays and New Jersey's coastal bays, may also have an undocumented issue with derelict fishing gear. We approached NOAA, and after a couple of revisions on our first go-around, we were first funded in 2012 and have completed 3 awards since then, leading to the recovery of about 3,500 pots from our small coastal bays, and we have trained 8 fishers to be involved in that program. Core values of our work have pretty much remained the same throughout that time, and they're listed here, and I'll touch on each of them a little bit. I think it's everyone's values to protect NOAA trust resources, our commercially and recreationally important species. At Stockton, we believe that removal is obviously very important, but we've also learned over the 10 years that prevention can be equally important. So to kind of illustrate that, I think on your left is my good friend Warren Unkert, commercial crabber, happy in the wintertime, being paid to collect pots, clean up his bay, making some money, and during the off season. On the right is an even happier Warren. That's Warren during the season after recovering one of his own pots, because we showed him how to use these consumer-grade side-scan sonars that my others here are speaking about to actually retrieve his gear when he notices it's lost. So some of the success that we've had is being able to put those sonars in the crabber's hand and have them keep them throughout the summer and retrieve gear, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So engaging and supporting industry partners is one thing that he asked me to touch on. Most important thing to do, in my opinion, is to respect their knowledge, ask questions, and listen to their ideas. The average waterman, you know, the amount of knowledge they have about the waterways is, you know, blows away often the PhDs that we work with daily. They just have a wealth of knowledge. They're out there every day. So respect that knowledge and listen to them. The most important thing to not do is let the press spin articles with negative comments. And I have a story for that. When we had our first project in around 2012, I was excited. It was some of our first federal funding at Stockton at our relatively small lab. We were working with commercial watermen, something that is important to me. We're getting pressed. I'm like, this is great. Out comes the article. I forget the exact title, but it was something like, "Commercial Death Traps Litter New Jersey's Coastal Bays." And obviously, just by the title alone, it immediately made it sound like it was the industry's fault that we have this issue. That was obviously not a good thing. Since then, I pretty much have decided that I will take them by the neck, and before they leave me, if they interview us about our projects, the press or anybody's going to write about our work understands that this is not the industry's fault. They're our allies in trying to help clean this up, and it's just so important. So it's something we really, really stress. You can't stress it enough. I'm sure everyone's had the press take 6 words out of the 30 words you said, and it comes out differently. So be real careful with that. What can we do to engage more industry partners? I think some of the work being done here, stressing the economic values of removals and preventions, is very important. Thank you to Team VIMS and Ward and others that are doing a lot of work in this area, but basically make them believe that there's, an economic value to doing these removals and doing prevention with the sonar use. Our program's a little different in the respect that we have an opportunity to train students throughout it. So we train our students on side-scan sonar theory and use just through our coursework. We use this project as a great example of side-scan sonar applications. And then we also use this project as a great example of science, industry, cooperative research, and stewardship. And that, I think, is especially important these days. Over the years, and I've been in academic support position for over 25 years, and I feel like a lot of undergraduate students, more so than before, kind of come with this, they often, sometimes some of them, equate stewardship with, stop all harvest, right? So I feel it's really important that we help them understand about seafood, the industry, collaborative research, and all that type of related work is probably even more important now with our young folks coming into the programs. Like many of the projects being talked about today, we like to involve the community. The way we do it is we bring most of the gear back to our field facility, depending on where we're working, and at the end of the year, we invite the public, the recovery teams, who are the commercial crabbers hired on our projects, our students, our faculty, and we break down that gear, return usable gear, set aside usable rebar and redistribute it back to the industry, and cook crabs and clams and other things out of the bay and have a good time. Some of the lessons learned over these 10 years listed here. I'll go over each one a little bit. Shallow bay recovery is much like, I think our bays are obviously much more like the Delaware bays than they are Chesapeake Bay. Relatively shallow, relatively small, behind the Barrier Islands in New Jersey. Some of the unique challenges that we found when we got into this, we're using relatively small boats, 18 to maybe 25-foot outboard powered boats. We have very soft sediments in the majority of our areas, so gear gets buried pretty easily. Tearing out of gear, I think Ward mentioned this a little bit, can be an issue, so we've worked on techniques and things like that. We generally use either a single or a daisy chain grapple option. Both of these are hand deployed, and it's really kind of a personal preference. And we use the side scan sonar during our recovery, so that might be a little bit different than what some of the other groups are doing, and might have to do with density. So when it's more spread out, that upper left image is from the consumer grade sonars. We'll load all the waypoints that we've collected with our broader ranging sonar onto the recovery team's consumer grade sonar, and then they generally travel to that waypoint and are close to it, and then once they see it again, then they go into recovery mode, and that's worked well for us. We do see the hotspot pattern that Ward spoke a little bit about. One interesting thing that we see is a difference in the type of gear there. On the left is Mullica River, Great Bay, heavily crabbed, single buoys, a lot of waterfront restaurants, a lot of boat cutoffs. Most of the gear we recover from there is commercial gear. On the right are little hot spots outside of marinas in a more urbanized estuary in central New Jersey, in Barnegat area, and a good portion of that gear is recreational gear. So obviously it can still be cut off by boats, but some portion of it is also improperly rigged recreational gear being lost. Promoting industry, again, is really one of the most important things to us. Just valuing their involvement in these programs and keeping them working in the summertime is important to our programs. And again, I'll just stress this to us, this in-season value of side scan sonar use by fishers, at least in these, with the smaller boats. And our fishermen probably run 200 to 300 pots, pretty smaller operations likely than the Chesapeake. But this year-round sonar use can prevent loss and kind of break that cycle. So it's something we're really focusing on. Our trained partners recover about 50 to 80% of their lost gear each season. Some years they might only be losing 10 or 20 pots, so that might not be a lot. Other years they could be losing 50, 60, 75 pots and recovering, what a partner record. I think Warren and his wife recovered 47 pots one season. So that was 47 pots that would have stayed in the system, would have caught target and non-target species for at least a year or two. So it's important to see that value. And I think we can use this concept as a financial incentive to get more partners. Thanks to NOAA for funding these projects and our next project. We'll be working for the next 3 years on a new project in New Jersey's coastal bays. So just go over that a little bit. We're going to some of the highlights of that project, which is really just being spun up now. We'll be doubling the amount of fishers, so we're going to go from 8 to 16 commercial crabbers involved in our program. Each of them will have a sonar that they will use year-round. The ultimate goal for us is that they're going to be recovering their lost gear during the season in between the winter times. We're expanding our services to other fisheries. We've already done this a little bit on the last project. Oyster gear fishery in New Jersey is expanding pretty quickly, and some of those, especially new entries to that industry, are beginning to lose some gear, often to ice or other issues. So we are offering our services to them and hope that they will reach out to us if they need assistance. We'll be doing a little bit of drone work in shallow water to identify areas of gear. We will be working in the ADV space a little bit, and I'll be talking to some of the people presenting earlier. It won't be me working on that part so much at Stockton, but I took many notes in the earlier session today, so some portion of our project will be assessment of the issue in New Jersey and removal, a few $100,000 of removal money just to kind of get things going in New Jersey. And throughout all our projects, we'll be increasing our efforts with diversity, equity, inclusion, largely by reaching out to some of the underserved communities, which are really not too far from us. Atlantic City, Pleasantville, and Camden are some areas that we've been starting to work in. And we'll be launching a center called the Marine Technology Education Center, or something like that. MARTECH is the acronym. The idea with that is to have a group of trained students that can assist a waterman that may call and say they've lost, for instance, oyster gear due to ice. We're considering a sonar loan program, so I was interested to hear a little bit about that, and basically just trying to get the word out to the various industries that, Stockton's there for them. We have these side scan sonars. We can help and we can respond to different types of issues that they might be having. And that is it. If you'd like to learn more, we have a website called wecrabnj.org, and you can find out more there. And again, thank you to NOAA for the funding, and I will join the rest and take questions later. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Renee Sanders. I am a senior marine scientist with the Center for Coastal Resources Management, which is part of William & Mary's Virginia Institute of Marine Science, or as we refer to ourselves, VIMS. I'm really excited to share with you about our brand new program which is the Nationwide Fishing Trap Removal Assessment and Prevention Program, or as we call it, simply TRAP. Okay, so this program really started on a local and perhaps regional scale here in Virginia, and then branching out largely into the Chesapeake Bay, including Maryland, looking at the various impacts of derelict fishing gear, particularly in our region for blue crab. But this is not just a local issue, it's not just a regional issue, it's not even just a nationwide issue as we're currently addressing it. This is very much a global problem. So we're hoping that our nationwide project will be a great example for other places around the world to be able to draw an example from. So here we can see on the various lines across coastlines around the world, some common pod and trap style fisheries, which include many species of crabs such as blue crab, brown crab, Dungeness crab, American lobster, stone crab, and spiny lobster we can see here. And I just wanted to briefly share some very common causes for loss of fishing gear that causes, this derelict gear to build up and this huge issue for marine debris. It's not just to one area. These are common throughout the world. So things like bad weather. Here in the Bay, think of things like tropical storms and hurricanes coming through and equipment getting lost because of that. Faulty gear, not being set up properly in the first place. Some folks honestly just discarding the materials and not coming back for them. Error in setting up the traps properly. Various types of conflict. It could be recreational boaters accidentally coming by and cutting a line. There's also issues like vandalism, theft. There's a lot of different things that cause these different things to become lost. So this nationwide program, it started off on a more local scale here in Virginia. We started a program in 2008, which wrapped up in 2014, and it really gained in popularity over the years. So essentially, we hired local Virginia fishers in the off season to go out, find this abandoned gear, and to collect these traps, get this stuff out of the water. So this is a collaboration between those watermen, an agency called the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, who is a wonderful partner, and those of us here at VIMS. And here we can see some of the debris that we collected for our area. The biggest piece here was definitely the crab pots. So you can see thousands of pots were collected each year, as well as, pots for peelers, peeler pots, eel pots, nets, etc. The first 3 years, we had substantially more funding, so we were able to hire more people to get out on the water. Those last 3 years, we had less funding to work with, so we were able to hire less people. It wasn't that there wasn't as much gear building up out there, we just didn't have as many people out doing the work. Okay, so when we're sending people out, questions automatically come up, such as how many traps are we talking about and where are these things? So we started with some statistics. We looked at geographically weighted regression statistics to determine location of traps as well as various contributing factors to predict things like presence, mean densities, etc. For these traps. And we were looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 145 abandoned traps that we predicted being lost in general throughout the Chesapeake. We found that our model was actually quite accurate. For example, one of our localities here, we predicted with our model that there would be 1,147 abandoned traps in that area. And then when we actually went out and collected, we found 1,192, so quite accurate. And we can see here in our blue color, either none or very few derelict pots found in those areas, so more further south. And then these orange and red shades indicate a much higher number of derelict pots found per locality, especially here in the north, and then some more inland areas along our rivers. Okay, I'll speak about this a bit more in some upcoming slides, but we also looked at how many blue crabs, the species that are actually being targeted in this area, do these derelict traps kill annually, and how many of these are actually of marketable size. So we'll take a bit of a look later at this. Okay, so I will preface this slide by saying that no wildlife was harmed in the making of this video, but I will just briefly share this little clip here. So a big issue with these derelict traps is wildlife bycatch mortality. And a particular species of concern for our region is the diamondback terrapin, our cute little friend down here. So something of note about the diamondback terrapin is that it shares an almost identical range with the blue crab. And these terrapins tend to be very drawn to these traps. They will go right in, and then they tend to struggle with finding their way out. So as we may see this little fellow do here, right on schedule, they tend to float up in the traps, trying to look for a way to get out through the top. That usually doesn't work. That's usually not where things are placed for them to get in and out. These terrapins, when they dive underwater, they can be underwater anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, at which point, if they are still stuck in these traps, they do drown, unfortunately. So as we can see here, one of our collected traps contain 94 dead terrapins, and that's definitely concerning for this vulnerable species. We have been looking at things, various mitigation measures, such as kind of creating these little escape panels. You can see different styles. This oval shape here has shown to be particularly effective for the terrapin. And I promise we did pull this trap right after this video. Okay. And here we just see some images of our fishers out on the water collecting these traps. As you can see, some of these are just encoded in various vegetation and muck, so you can tell they've been down there for quite a while. Okay, so in addition to the terrapin, there are many species that find themselves in these traps, everything from mammals, birds. Here we're discussing sport fish. So there are various species of fish that will also end up in these traps that are valuable at the market. So here we can see how many fish there are that were found per pot. We see a couple of stars indicating those highest number of fish that were found here on the York River. And we're also concerned with the blue crab actually being stuck in these as well. Obviously, that's the species that is being targeted with these traps. However, if these traps are being abandoned, the blue crab is not adding to the population in the area, and it's also not adding to local harvest for this industry. So we can see for the female blue crabs, especially here in the north, a really high number of crabs were found per trap. Female blue crabs throughout the life of that Virginia project, we found over 14,000 in the abandoned traps. Similar story with our male blue crabs, over 10,000 found in these traps, also with kind of a clustering in that more northern area of the project with those higher number of crabs found per trap. Here's just the visuals. We're talking about lots of different species being found in these traps here. We see lots of fish. We see our crabs here. I think you get the point. We also, considering this, created estimates for our Chesapeake Bay states when looking at how many crabs we're talking about per trap are being killed in these abandoned pieces of equipment. For Virginia, that's averaging at 25 crabs per trap. Maryland's a little less at 16. So Bay-wide, we're looking at 20.5. Some other states have conducted similar work. So North Carolina is looking at 19 crabs, and Louisiana is looking at just a touch under 26. Okay, so we've talked about the effect on wildlife. This is also very impactful for local fishery economies. So we're looking at, just for the Bay here, and we have a model conducted by Dr. Andrew Sheld, who's a member of our trap program team here. So we can see here in the red the expected harvest that would have occurred without our project, that 08 to 2014 project. And then we can see in the blue what the harvest actually was. So during that project, we had an additional 38 million pounds, a little over that, an additional harvest, which was a 24% increase over the harvests that have been happening before. So that's over $33 million gained by our efforts. Without that, we would have expected a reduction of 30% in the harvest. And we also discovered that it's really important to not just have a project running for a couple of years and then think the problem is solved. Nope, these traps are still being abandoned every year, so there has to be a continuous effort out there to get this debris out of the water. So we're looking at, based on what we've seen, an optimal level of getting about 7,000 of those traps out of the water each year, kind of being that optimal level there. So the work doesn't end. We've got a few different solutions that we can approach for this issue with derelict traps. We have prevention, remediation, and mitigation. Prevention, think of outreach and education in the first place to keep these types of things from happening. Remediation is things like having a state trap removal program. Mitigation, we're looking at things like those escape panels that we were talking about. So here we see some biodegradable options. This biopolymer PHA, as well as the twine, these break down over time to create an escape panel. And there are already a variety of coastal states which are engaging in various measures to take action on this issue. And considering that this is now a nationwide project, we have definitely been talking with folks all over the country, various organizations and agencies, and we see that there are already many efforts in place on this particular effort with derelict gears. So we see many efforts already taking place on the East Coast, West Coast states, Alaska, and Hawaii. And lastly, I would just like to wrap up. I know I already said that we're really excited about this effort, but I must share that this is actually the largest grant award that we have ever received in the history of VIMS, which is quite lengthy. Right now, we're in year 1 of the project, but we are set up for 4 years of funding right now. We are very hopeful for a year 5, and we're definitely hoping that we will be able to continue the program after these first few years, because we know it's really important to continue this work. Right now, we're working hard to standardize the types of data that we're collecting with our project. It's really important that we have those standards put in place. We'll be hiring more fishery industry members for our efforts. We've also created a national innovation policy lab with a group at the University of Georgia. We're really excited to work with them. And throughout our efforts, they are going to be working with us to create recommendations for policy both at state level and at the federal level. We also are working with a Native American consulting group to find ways to target and encourage tribal communities to get involved with this program and for us to be able to get those folks out to conduct removals on their lands and take care of these things in their waters. So I will close out with just a brief little video here. We can see all of these little red dots are areas where we've already conducted work, already collected data in our local region, and we can't wait to see this become a nationwide effort. So with that, I will conclude my talk. It was wonderful getting to speak with you today. Thank you.
So we've done this in Maryland Coastal Basin with the Maryland Coastal Program, the Marine Debris Plunger Program for ghost trap sites. Have any of you all developed a mounting system that enables you to loan commercial transponders out to recreational people without drilling holes in the boat? So if you get volunteers that want to do this and they want to spend a day going around and don't have a side scan sonar, that they can actually put this through a rod holder or something on one of their boats where they can mark it via GPS and then turn it back in, and then someone else can go later on marking or pick it up or whatever they want to do. Has anybody done anything like that?
We are working on it right now. Possibly. So Art Tremonis and his lab that I mentioned earlier, the partners on the sonar, they are currently working on trying to design a unit that can be transferable and not drill into boats.
I have a side scanner, but most people don't want to drill a hole in their hull for a temporary solution. I know Maryland Coastal Bays has 2, and they were looking, I don't know whether they followed through to get a design, but I mean, that was something that would allow volunteers to be more active in doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we plan to have at least 6 units that will be available for folks to borrow on different boat types. So we've been looking at the different boats in the area and how best to figure out how to attach it. So once we have that, I will be more than happy to share.
We've had some of our commercial partners just mount the transducer on a 2x4 and then C-clamp it to the transom. It works okay. I think the one you're developing, I wrote down a note to reach out to you about it when I saw the picture, is probably better. And any solutions that if you're going out just to look for gear, any solutions that put that transducer on the bow of the boat, and I have an example of that, work really well. The imaging's a lot better, so it's just another thing to kind of think about if that's, if you're just going fishing, you don't want it on the bow, but if you're going out, I would think that some of these other ones are doing bow-mounted stuff too, so there are some options.
Thank you so much. I'd rather not yell a lot. So, Steve, you were talking about students that are involved in doing this work and that it creates a sense of reality for the stuff they come across. I work with young people as well, and they have a lot of opinions, and a lot of them are very nihilistic, and it's an all-or-nothing approach. I would like you to speak more on that, if you could.
Yeah, sure. It's just, using this as an example of industry, and they're coming to study marine science, just early on in their undergraduate careers, who is the audience that I generally work with, just getting them to understand the value of industry and academic or researcher collaborations is important. We teach a class on fisheries management, that focuses on the value of seafood and, tradition and history and fisheries in general. And I just think it's important to almost beat it out of some of them that the solution is not to stop fishing, right? Literally more so than I mentioned, I've been in this academic support kind of career for 25 plus years, and it's changed. And some of it has merit and some of it doesn't. So educating them early on and getting them to see that value and getting them to actually work with fishermen and hear from fishermen about their struggles and their industry and their fifth generation and all those kinds of things, I think lends a little reality to it. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but that's something I try to do at every opportunity I have.
Another question back there.
Hello? Oh, it's on. The talks were so good. My mind is blown by what's possible now with the side-scan sonar compared to several years ago. I appreciate showing the Diamondback terrapin. It shows kind of like why we care so much about this stuff, and one of the reasons. And I'm just curious what the biodegradable escape regulations, what is the current state across the mid-Atlantic states? Does anybody kind of know? I had just assumed that all states would require a biodegradable escape panel or something like that. And just Googling about it a little bit, it looks like the Gulf states all do. The West Coast crab fisheries have since the 80s. I'm just curious about that.
I can say at least from the Maryland perspective, it's not required there. I don't think East Coast states are requiring it. It just put this in perspective of the question that was just asked. Putting something into a crab trap that is, designed to trap something that's part of someone's livelihood, and then you're adding an extra cost to that. You're also then adding some unknown about its ability to degrade over time, and I'm dependent upon that harvest, is a bit of a political challenge. So it does tend to get, some serious debates, even in Maryland, but it hasn't really gotten traction, and I think largely because of that. Can I just address one thing? I think it's simple for, to kind of keep the messaging with the younger generation to, there's a difference between preservation and conservation, and I think that's what you're getting at. And I think the work that we do at the Oyster Recovery Partnership is to really try to strike that balance of designing things that are sustainable, designing practices that are sustainable for our fisheries. I eat crabs, I eat oysters, we love seafood. I can't imagine going at that industry and trying to say that they need to stop their practices. This is just unfortunately a byproduct of an industry that we should value, and it has a tremendous amount of economic value. So it is a bit of a sensitive subject.
That was well said, thanks. In New Jersey, we do require a biodegradable panel, but it can be as simple as non-stainless hog rings in one small square of the trap, and it's nothing that works in, weeks or even months, or maybe even a year or more. You were asking about biodegradable panels, not turtle excluders, correct? Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that's our regulation in New Jersey.
Just to quickly add, I don't mean to take up too much of this time on my regulation nerdiness, but in Washington State, the issue of it is expensive and it's a big deal to ask fishermen to change their gear, and I do see the ocean as the world's biggest food production system, and these are solvable problems, but it can be as simple as just a couple pieces of cotton twine. And I know it gets complicated, but this is to me, a pretty good, cost-effective, it seems like something that we ought to look at more.
Yeah, and I mean, from a Delaware perspective, as I mentioned, it's really only the turtle bycatch reduction device that's required, and that's not even being installed in a lot of these pots. But in this particular area, a lot of the fishermen are sustenance. This is their primary source of food. So any sort of additional cost, you're adding to it. But some of it, to me, is the sellers of the pots in these areas. They aren't rigging them. It's not required. So yeah, they're not rigging them that way. But some of these people are just here for the weekend and they buy a pot. So you can charge them an extra $50 and they will never know the difference. Just saying. Yeah. But yeah, it's a hard thing to figure out how to address and balance between livelihood and practicality.
So boat strikes apparently are a large percentage of why we have lost traps. I saw some data on that, and I don't quite believe that because a lot of the buoys that I find typically have 20 or 30 feet of line on them, so it's kind of the rigging issue. But there's a lot of boaters, Chesapeake Bay going around Turkey Point. It's like a slalom course sometimes. I've boated up there. I've boated here in the bay. Different types of boats, bigger boats up here, smaller boats here. But still, crabbers are out in the morning when it's calm, setting their traps, marking where they put them. Recreational boaters come out in the afternoon when the wind's picked up. It's tough to see them. It's even tougher to see them when you have color schemes which are black and yellow, black and green. Is there any effort to make crab pot buoys more visible?
I'm not aware of any effort specifically about the single-buoyed crab pots. One of the recommendations that we made in our 2009 report on the research was that we were seeing a slight shift in the way that of the behavior of how gear was being set. And there's a practice that the industry is using that they're calling trot lines. They're basically a larger buoy that has a flag on it, and it's a trot line that has one end and then another end, and on that buoy, on that line is a string of crab pots. That's much more visible to the boating industry to see that. And it also allows the crabbers to potentially avoid a lot of loss of their own individual gear. So we advocated that as a potential prevention measure, and it does seem to be increasing. But the challenge with it is recreational boating is also increasing. The numbers of boats on the Chesapeake Bay is tremendous at times. And so that gear is also used as a way to fish areas that typically wouldn't be fished, but also might be higher use in terms of that recreational boating. So it's a constant challenge of education, I think. And I don't know, I appreciate the comments from VIMS, from Renee, that it's just going to continue, and I appreciate the support that we get from our funders. Because as growing up, I assumed this is an issue that should always be solved, right? But issues just continue to evolve as we have greater and greater needs of our ecosystem.
From a Delaware point of view, the recreational pots must have a white crab pot that has their name and address on it. So white is supposed to be the only color you have in there. From a different point of view, so I grew up working the water and crabbing. Whenever we set our pots, my family always looked for the brightest, most obnoxious colors you could find. because when you're out there, you work and you want to find these things quick. So from the waterman's perspective, they're trying to make their lives easier and make it easier to see for them too.
Just real quick, in New Jersey, we've also tried to advocate a little bit for the trot line approach. Some of our fishermen do use it in certain areas, but some fishermen are just reluctant to do that. Just the way they fish, the edges they fish, there's just different reasons that they can't do that. As far as colors, it doesn't matter what color it is when it's sun glare or nighttime, and I think a lot of cutoffs. So I think to some degree, unfortunately, boat cutoffs to single buoys is, other than education, should prevent some of them, is to some degree unavoidable. And again, that's why we really like to focus on giving that tool, that side scan tool, to our crabbers, so that they're going to recover at least some portion of the gear that they lose. So that, just because I think to some degree, it's always going to happen. So.
Hi, my question is for Ward. Over here in the middle. On your timeline slide, it said that on your project up to 2012, you were doing the whole bay and you had 800 fishermen, and then in 2018 on, you were only in Baltimore County and you only had a dozen to 15 fishermen. I was just wondering why you went from the whole bay just to Baltimore County.
It's a direct link to the funding that's available to do it. The work that we did in that time frame early on, 2010 to 2012, it's sort of similar to the presentation from VIMS, where they said they had that whole time series from the same period, more or less, but they did 6 years. We only did 2 years. There were federal funds that were available en masse. The NOAA actually declared the blue crab fishery as a disaster, so it allowed this pot of money, just called disaster funds, to be available to support industry. And it wasn't a disaster because of derelict traps. It was a disaster because the economic depression that was related really to the soft crab industry. But that funding was there to support directly that industry. So we had large amount of money at the time, and the goal was to get it out and disperse it to the most people possible. At this point, there just isn't that funding to really support that large scale. So we've taken a more strategic approach, and hoping that we can prove that, and maybe other counties, would see the value in that for their industry, but also the value in removing the debris too.